Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. So, when I started fundraising, I think I was working off of a Word document, maybe even WordPerfect for those of you who are as old as I am. I turned 50 this year, so that gives some sense of my vintage. But yeah, I had a document I printed out with all of my donors' names on it, and I would just go through it and I would talk to those people. And that was back in the day when I was doing what they call in the faith-based world missionary support. So I would get $25 pledges, $50 pledges, $100 pledges from friends and neighbors and local churches that wanted to pay my salary to work with young people in the community. But yeah, that's where I started 30 years ago. And today, we're in the age of AI. What a radical change. I mean, I didn't even have a CRM that I was working with back then. I didn't experience a CRM until I was 8 years into my career. And that's a different thing, right? When I started, mail merges were kind of cutting edge, a thing you could do, right? That not all of my colleagues knew how to do, but I did. And boy, things have changed. And that's why in this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about where technology's going. Now, I'm no expert on technology or artificial intelligence. And I know there's a lot of controversy out there. I know that some folks feel like the scraping that was done to train these AI chatbots was just inherently unethical and that the whole thing should be scrapped. I know there's some people that have real concerns about AI leading to the extinction of humanity. I'm not here to comment on any of that. Rather, I kind of want to just take a look at, from a very practical standpoint, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing as a fundraising professional, where I'm seeing benefits, and maybe where things need to get better, and maybe even some things that I have hope for in the future. But I will tell you, I do use AI. I have used Claude. I have used Gemini. I've used ChatGPT in different settings for different purposes. And for those of you that are still kind of thinking, well, how would this work for my organization? Hopefully this will be helpful if you haven't dove in yet to explore it. And again, I'm no expert, and I can only speak from my own experience with what I've used. And I'm sure many of you have done really creative, useful things. And if so, I hope you'll comment on my LinkedIn page or shoot me an email at thomasdauber@abundantvision.net and let me know what you've done, or even comment here on this podcast. But I began using AI because I've been working my last 2 stops in very small shops with just a handful of fundraisers and really no back office support at all. And so when you don't have a lot of people, you have to look to technology to try and make up for that. And back in the day, 30 years ago, that meant doing mail merges instead of writing each email separately and personalizing it, right? But today, it means asking a chatbot to do something for you that you may not have time to do yourself. Now, a couple things just to address. I know that there is concern that dependence on AI could somehow undermine authenticity in dealing with donors. What I mean is this: is fundraising is built on trust and relationships. And if we're inauthentic, if all of our material is being produced by chatbots in a way that isn't authentic to the organization, it doesn't really represent us in our voice, well, that can be a problem. If I just have some artificial intelligence reaching out to my donors as a point of engagement, I don't think that's ideal either. I think many of us have experienced AI customer service bots on the phone. And I find myself having very little patience with them. And, you know, they'll ask me a question, I will give the answer, and they will misinterpret what I say. I know that AI has been used in the past in drive-throughs around the country. I think it was McDonald's maybe or White Castle. I can't remember which one. But it ended up getting recalled in many places because it was just leading to really bad customer service experiences. And so I think there's a real legitimate criticism, at least at this point, about AI maybe not being the best thing for customers and clients and donors, right? And ultimately, because we're a trust based industry or a trust based practice, you might say, if we're relying on AI to do relational work with us, we're not really building authentic relationships more quickly by relying on it. But what we can do is we can automate the things in our life as fundraisers that aren't relationship based. And I'll talk about that more in just a bit. But it's important to just recognize AI does not replace relationship work. Yeah, I don't believe a donor would care if I used AI to sort some data or evaluate some data. I think they would care if I had a chatbot call them and ask them for an appointment. I don't think they'd like that as much. Um, and I think it's also important to be honest when we use AI for something. We don't want to take credit for things that we didn't do. It's not necessarily something we need to announce necessarily, but we want to be transparent about the work we do and how we do. And so the question before we get into how one might use AI is what can we use it for? Again, I think it's really helpful for synthesizing information, looking for patterns, trying to understand the data that you already have. And I see that as important because it's really helpful when it comes to doing things quickly and efficiently. But we only want to do that in contexts where quality doesn't degrade, right? I mean, if you had a job description to write, I think it's totally fine to use AI for that. If you had some benchmarking to do, I think it's totally fine to use AI for that. AI can very quickly scan a lot of data to understand things about your industry, like what's an appropriate percentage of your budget to be spending on fundraising. It can get you that answer. Now, I know there's a lot of concerns about hallucinations. And is the AI making things up? And you've got to be you need to check that data. The interactions I have with AI, a lot of times I talk about them in terms of being interrogations. It will suggest something, it may produce something, but then I'm going to probably spend a number of hours interrogating that data and asking questions and challenging it and asking for sources. If you think that you can just get away with offloading a whole bunch of work to AI, at least at this point in the game, without checking it, I think you're going to be setting yourself up for real problems. Another good thing AI is really great at is looking for patterns that you and I may miss, or we may just not have time. Digging through large sets of data to see, well, are there patterns here that would indicate that a donor might be ready for a larger ask, or that this might be an ideal time to go try to visit with this donor. That's what it's really, really great with, is looking for patterns and synthesizing and analyzing data. But again, with any type of output like that, you've got to check it. You've got to review it. You've got to calibrate it. I think AI is really, really helpful for people who are experts and have enough expertise to be able to tell whether or not the output from the chatbot is good or not. If you don't have that expertise, I think it's really dangerous because you don't know what you're getting. It could be really bad, but you wouldn't know. So I think sometimes when not to use AI, one is when you really need a lot of authenticity. I wouldn't have AI call a donor, a first-time donor, on the phone to say thank you. I do that personally in my organization. And I call the person, I tell them how important their gift is and why it matters to us and why our mission is important. And I think if I had a chatbot doing that, it would come across as really insincere, and it would not make the personal connection that you need to have with a human being. And I know people using virtual engagement officers around the world, in higher ed especially. I think there's a case to be made for that. I'm a little skeptical, but I understand if you have 500,000 alumni and you have 200 fundraisers, it can be hard to connect with each of those people individually. That's a conversation for another time. I'd love to have one of those folks on, actually, just to talk a bit. But there's something to be said for a personal connection, and certainly ask. It requires a lot of times some conviction. It requires some nuance. And in the context of the conversation as a fundraiser, a lot of times you're making judgments about where to take the conversation and how to interact with that donor. And I'm not sure that I trust a bot to do that, really. I think, too, when you're dealing with donor privacy and donor intent, that's something, too, that I would be very careful about using with especially, there's different types of ways to work with, like, say, ChatGPT. If you just have a free account and you're going on there, the data that you're using is being used to train that chatbot. And so if you were to put donor data, sensitive donor data, giving history with identifiable names, that sort of thing, into that chatbot, you're risking making your private data available to OpenAI. And I just wouldn't do that. I think that's really unwise. If you're going to do something like that, you've got to make sure that you have an account with them that's a subscription-based one that's paid, where it's explicitly stated that data will never be used by the company. You've got to have some walls to protect your data there. And a lot of times the work that we do as fundraisers really requires us knowing a specific culture organizationally, and maybe even some unwritten rules that just wouldn't be obvious to a robot, right? And if the work you're doing requires some of that stuff, that is, again, something I would not rely on AI for. And lastly, if you haven't thought for yourself as a person how you would explain something you've generated with AI, I would not present it to a donor, because if they start interrogating you about the document and you can't answer it, you're going to look like a fool. If all you can say is, well, I actually don't know the answer to that question because AI produced this for me, and I don't actually know if it's right or not. That's not a position you put yourself in as a professional. You're going to immediately undermine that donor or colleague's confidence in you. So those would be good ways to not use AI. And so just ask yourself, as you're thinking about, should I use AI for a particular project or not? Ask yourself 2 questions. Would you be comfortable telling a donor or a board member that you used AI on a particular thing? If yes, it's probably fine. If you're a little nervous or embarrassed, that's probably an indicator that maybe you shouldn't. That's all the time we have today. But be sure to tune in next week to hear the next part of this exciting conversation. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together towards major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.